History remembers Wu Zetian as a formidable figure, the only female emperor in China's long and storied past. We see her as a woman who shattered tradition, defied a patriarchal world, and single-handedly ruled a vast empire. Her story is one of ambition, intelligence, and unprecedented power. But behind the gleaming official histories, the monumental statues, and the tales of her political prowess lies a much darker, more complex narrative, a story that is rarely told, often whispered, and largely erased from the grand accounts of her reign. This is a story about the hidden costs of absolute power. It's a story of control, of fear, and of the men who were silenced by history. Today, we read pulling back the curtain on one of the most controversial and mysterious aspects of her life. The only known male harem in Chinese imperial history, what happened within the palace walls, considered a monarch's prerogative at the time, feels shocking and, frankly, terrifying by today's standards. This isn't just a tale of an empress and her lovers. It's a deep dive into the psychology of power and the forgotten lives of the men who served her. To truly understand the story of Wu Zetian's male harem, we have to understand the world she lived in. The Thames Dynasty was a cosmopolitan and relatively open era in Chinese history. Women enjoyed more freedoms than in many other periods. They could ride horses, engage in business, and express themselves more openly. But even in this progressive environment, the political world was a fortress of male dominance. The emperor was the son of heaven, a divine masculine figure. His power was absolute, and one of its ultimate symbols was the Imperial Harem, a vast institution housing thousands of women whose sole purpose was to serve him and produce heirs. The harem wasn't just about pleasure, it was a political tool. It was a display of wealth, a way to forge alliances with powerful families, and a guarantee of the imperial bloodline's continuation. The women inside were, in essence, property of the state, their lives dictated by the emperor's whims. Now, imagine a woman stepping into this role. Wu Zetian didn't just become a ruler. She took on the title of Huangdi, emperor, not empress, consort, or regent. She was declaring herself the equal of any man who had ever sat on the dragon throne. And if the emperor had a harem of 3,000 women as a symbol of his supreme authority, then why shouldn't she? To Wu Zetian, establishing her own retinue of male companions, wasn't just a matter of personal desire. It was a powerful political statement. It was a radical act of gender reversal. She was mirroring the very institution that had defined male imperial power for centuries. By doing so, she was telling the world, I am not just a woman pretending to be a ruler. I am the ruler, and I will claim every privilege that comes with this throne. This set the stage for one of the most intriguing and shadowy chapters of her reign. So, who were the men in Wu Zetian's inner circle? They weren't just randomly chosen handsome faces. The two most famous were the Zheng brothers, Zheng Yizi and Zheng Chengzheng. The records describe them as exceptionally beautiful, skilled in music, poetry, and the arts of pleasure. They were young, charming, and utterly devoted to the empress. They were brought into the palace and showered with titles, wealth, and influence. Wu Zetian, by this point in her late 60s and 70s, seemed to dote on them. They were her constant companions, her confidants, and her source of entertainment and comfort. On the surface, it looks like a story of an aging monarch finding joy in her final years, but the reality was far more complicated and far more dangerous. The Zhengbros weren't just lovers. They became a political force. Because they had the empress's ear, they held immense, unchecked power. High-ranking officials, seasoned generals, and powerful ministers had to go through them. They get to Wu Zetian. The brothers started meddling in state affairs, accepting bribes, and promoting their allies, while punishing their enemies. The court, which was already a snake pit of factional intrigue, became even more toxic. The traditional Confucian scholars and officials were horrified. To them, the Zheng brothers were a corrupting influence, male concubines who were leading the empress and the empire astray. They saw the situation as a perversion of the natural order. A woman ruling was bad enough, but a woman ruling while being influenced by her male favorites, that was an existential threat to their entire worldview. And this is where the story takes a dark turn. Life for the men in Wu Zetian's service wasn't a glamorous fantasy. It was a life lived on a knife's edge. While they enjoyed incredible luxury, they were also completely dependent on the Empress's favor. One wrong word, one moment of displeasure, and their lives could be over. They were, in many ways, in the same precarious position as the women in a traditional harem. The fear must have been constant. They had to navigate the jealousy of other courtiers, the hatred of powerful officials. They had wealth and influence, but they had no real agency. Their existence was tied to one person's will. Let's think about the psychological toll. These men, particularly the Zheng brothers, were publicly shamed and privately feared. The official histories, written by their enemies, paint them as manipulative, greedy, and effeminate villains. They were stripped of their masculinity in the narrative. They weren't seen as powerful men in their own right, but as sycophants who achieved success through the bedroom. This character assassination was a key part of the backlash against Wu Zetian. By delegitimizing the men around her, her enemies sought to delegitimize her rule. They argued that a woman's judgment, clouded by emotion and desire, couldn't be trusted. The story of her male harem became the ultimate proof of her unfitness to rule in their eyes. As Wu Zetian grew older and more frail, her grip on power began to weaken. The court officials who had long despised the brothers saw their chance. In the year 705, a palace coup was staged. The plotters, led by a group of high-ranking ministers, stormed the palace. Their first targets were not the Empress herself, but the Zheng brothers. They were dragged from their quarters and executed on the spot. Their deaths were the prelude to the main event. The forced abdication of Wu Zetian. The coup leaders confronted the ailing Empress, and demanded she return power to her son, Li Xian, restoring the Dynasty. With her protectors dead and her health failing, she had no choice but to agree. She died later that same year. The story of Wu Zetian's male harem is a fascinating lens through which to view her reign. It's a story about the double standards of power. A male emperor with thousands of concubines was seen as strong and virile. A female emperor with a handful of male companions was seen as decadent and corrupt. It reveals the deep-seated anxieties about female authority and sexuality that existed in her time, and to some extent, still echo today. But it's also a human story. It's the story of an incredibly powerful woman seeking companionship and control in her final years. And it's the tragic story of the men who were caught in her orbit, who enjoyed a brief, dazzling moment of power before being consumed by the very system that elevated them. Their names are recorded in history, not as individuals, but as symbols of an empress's alleged excesses. Their lives reduced to a cautionary tale. History is written by the victors, and in the end, the patriarchal system Wu Zetian fought so hard to overcome had the last word, shaping her legacy and erasing the complexities of the men who served her. Thank you for watching. If you found this dive into the hidden corners of history interesting, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that you won't find in the official textbooks. See you next time. Have you ever heard of an emperor so powerful they created their own dynasty? So ruthless they allegedly killed their own children to gain power. And so unique they were the only woman to ever hold the title in China's 4,000-year history. This is the story of Wu Zetian. To understand her incredible rise, we have to go back to the 10th dynasty, a golden age in Chinese history. The year is 624 AD. The world is a place of flourishing arts, bustling trade along the Silk Road, and a surprisingly open attitude towards women's roles in society. It was into this vibrant world that a girl named Wu Zhao was born. Unlike many girls of her time, she was encouraged by her father to read, write, and study politics and history. This education would become her most powerful weapon. At just 14, her beauty and intelligence caught the eye of Emperor Taizong, one of China's most revered rulers. She was brought into the palace as a low-ranking concubine, but the vast, competitive world of the Imperial Harem was no easy place to survive, let alone thrive. Thousands of women vied for the emperor's attention, and Wu Zhao, despite her wit, failed to capture Taizong's heart. For over a decade, she remained in the same low-ranking position, watching, learning, and waiting. During these years, she did something incredibly risky. She began a secret affair with the crown prince, Li Zi, Emperor Taizong's son. This was a capital offense, a betrayal that could have cost her life. But it was a calculated gamble. She knew that when Emperor Taizong passed away, her fate as a childless concubine was to be sent to a Buddhist monastery for the rest of her life. Her connection with the future emperor was her only hope. And so it happened. When Emperor Taizong died, Wu Zhao, along with all his other childless concubines, had her head shaved and was sent to Ganya Temple. It seemed her story was over. But Li Zi, now Emperor Gaozong, hadn't forgotten her. He was deeply in love and, against all tradition, he brought her back to the palace. This was her second chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. Back in the palace, Wu Zetian was no longer the naive young girl. She was a master of political strategy. She first allied herself with the current Empress Wang to take down the emperor's favorite, Consort Zhao. Once Consort Zhao was out of the way, Wu Zetian turned her attention to the empress herself. What happened next is one of the most infamous stories about her. Legend says that Wu Zetian gave birth to a daughter. One day, Empress Wang visited the baby. Shortly after she left, the baby was found dead, suffocated in her crib. Wu Zetian accused the empress of murder. The emperor, heartbroken and enraged, believed her. He deposed Empress Wang and made Wu Zetian his new empress. Historians debate whether Wu Zetian really killed her own child. Some argue it was a ruthless act of political genius. Others suggest it was a tragic accident, or even a story fabricated by her later political enemies to tarnish her name. We may never know the truth, but the result was clear. Wu Zetian was now the most powerful woman in China. As empress, she wasn't content to just be a pretty face by the emperor's side. Emperor Gaozong suffered from poor health, often plagued by strokes that left him debilitated. Wu Zetian stepped in, not just to help, but to rule. She would sit behind a screen during court sessions, listening to the ministers and advising the emperor. Soon, her advice became commands. The court officials began referring to them as the two saints, acknowledging that China effectively had two rulers. She proved to be an incredibly effective leader. She recruited talented officials based on merit, not just their family connections, by expanding the civil service examination system. This brought new, capable people into the government and broke the hold of the old aristocratic families. She also reformed the military and agricultural systems, ensuring the empire was both secure and prosperous. But her ambition didn't stop there. When Emperor Gaozong died, her sons, first Zhongzong, and then Rezong, ascended the throne. But they were emperors in name only. Wu Zetian ruled from behind the curtain as Empress Dowager and Regent, holding the real power. Anyone who dared to challenge her authority, including her own family members and powerful chancellors, was swiftly dealt with, exiled or executed. She established a network of secret police to root out any opposition, creating a climate of fear, but also solidifying her control. Finally, in the year 690, at the age of 67, she did the unthinkable. She cast aside the Tang Dynasty and established her own, the Zhou Dynasty. She declared herself emperor, taking the name Wu Zetian. This was a monumental moment. For the first and only time, a woman sat on the dragon throne, not as a regent or an empress consort, but as the supreme ruler, the son of heaven, or Iner Kase, the daughter of heaven. As emperor, Wu Zetian continued her effective policies. She was a patron of Buddhism, elevating it over Taoism as the state religion. This was a smart political move, as Buddhist scriptures contained prophecies about a female savior who would rule the world, which she used to legitimize her reign. She commissioned grand temples and the famous Longmen grottos, leaving a lasting artistic and religious legacy. Her reign was a period of relative stability and prosperity, a continuation of the Tang's golden age. She was known for her decisiveness and sharp political instincts. She listened to her people, even installing kappa boxes in the capital where citizens could anonymously post criticisms of her government or report corrupt officials. However, her final years were marked by paranoia and indulgence. She relied heavily on two young brothers, the Zhang brothers, who became her favored courtiers. Their influence grew, and many in the court feared they were manipulating the aging empress and plotting to usurp the throne. In 705, a palace coup led by her own ministers forced the now 81-year-old and ailing Wu Zetian to abdicate. Her son, Li Xian, was restored to the throne as Emperor Zhongzong, and the Tang Dynasty was re-established. Wu Zetian died later that year. Her final wish was to be buried not as an emperor, but as the empress of Emperor Gaozan, next to him in Qinling Mausoleum. The monument she left for herself is as fascinating as her life. It's a massive, blank stela stone tablet with no inscription. Why? Historians have debated this for centuries. Did she believe her accomplishments were too great for words? Or did she want future generations to judge her for themselves, leaving her legacy to be written by history? It remains one of China's great historical mysteries. So, how should we remember? Was she a ruthless tyrant who murdered her way to the top? Or a brilliant and capable leader who broke through the ultimate glass ceiling in a deeply patriarchal society? The truth is, she was likely both. She was a product of her time, a woman who had to be twice as clever and 10 times as ruthless as any man to achieve what she did. Her story is a complex tapestry of ambition, intelligence, brutality, and vision. She remains one of the most fascinating and controversial figures in all of history, a woman who dared to call herself emperor. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more incredible stories from history. See you next time. Step into the Thames Dynasty, often hailed as the golden age of China. Imagine bustling streets filled with merchants from all corners of the world, silk and spices perfuming the air. This was an era of unprecedented prosperity, where art, poetry, and innovation flourished. The capital Chang'an was the largest city in the world, a dazzling metropolis that symbolized the empire's might. From the outside, the Thames Dynasty looked invincible, a beacon of civilization and power. But pull back the curtain of this magnificent stage, and you'll find a very different story. One of shadow, intrigue, and silent wars fought not on battlefields, but in the perfumed halls of the Imperial Palace. The Imperial Court was the heart of the empire, but it was a heart that beat with a dangerous and unpredictable rhythm. Here, power was the ultimate currency, and survival was a daily struggle. Imagine a world where every word is weighed, every glance is analyzed, and every friendship is a potential liability. This was the reality for anyone living within the Forbidden City's walls. From the highest-ranking officials to the lowest-ranking servants, the splendor of the palace, with its gilded roofs and serene gardens, masked a brutal ecosystem of ambition and betrayal. Let's talk about the key players in this high-stakes game. At the very top, of course, was the Emperor, the Son of Heaven. His favor was the sun that everyone orbited. To gain his attention meant wealth, influence, and security. To lose it could mean disgrace, exile, or even death, not just for you, but for your entire family. Officials would spend their lives mastering the art of flattery, trying to anticipate the emperor's moods and desires. A well-timed poem, a clever remark, or a strategic gift could elevate a person overnight. Conversely, a single misstep, a perceived slight, or an ill-spoken word could bring catastrophic ruin. The emperor, however, was not always the most powerful person in the room. He was often surrounded by competing factions, each vying for influence over him. There were the powerful aristocratic clans, families who had served the court for generations and saw it as their birthright to hold high office. They formed tight-knit networks, marrying amongst themselves and hoarding positions of power. They often looked down upon newcomers who rose through the civil service examinations, viewing them as upstart. Then you had the scholarific. These were the brilliant minds who had passed the grueling imperial exams. They believed in Confucian ideals of meritocracy and righteous governance. They often found themselves in direct conflict with the established aristocracy and another incredibly powerful group. The palace eunuchs were a unique and formidable force within the court. Because they were unable to have children and start their own dynasties, emperors often trusted them with immense power. They controlled access to the emperor, managed the palace's daily operations, and even commanded armies. Figures like Gao Lishi during Emperor Zhuangzong's reign became so influential that even the most senior ministers had to bow to them. They had their own intelligence networks, listening to whispers in the corridors, reading secret letters, and reporting everything back to their masters, or using it for their own gain. To be on the wrong side of a powerful eunuch was a death sentence. Life in the palace was a constant performance. Courtiers had to navigate a complex web of alliances and rivalries. You had to choose your allies carefully, but never trust them completely. A friend today could be a rival tomorrow, willing to sacrifice you for a promotion or to save their own skin. Spying was rampant. Servants were paid to listen in on conversations, and rivals would plant spies within each other's households. A private complaint about an imperial policy, whispered in your own study, could find its way to the emperor's ears. By morning, the paranoia was suffocating. The harem was another battleground, perhaps the most intense of all. Thousands of women lived within the inner court, all competing for the ultimate prize, the emperor's affection. The empress, the official consorts, and the countless concubines were locked in a perpetual struggle for status. A woman's position depended entirely on the emperor's favor and, crucially, on her ability to bear a son. The birth of a crown prince could secure a woman's position for life, elevating her entire family. This made the harem a hotbed of jealousy, sabotage, and conspiracy. Rumors of poisonings, false accusations, and elaborate schemes to frame rivals were commonplace. The beautiful, smiling faces hid ruthless ambition. Think about the story of Empress Wu Zetian. She began as a low-ranking concubine of Emperor Tezong. Through sheer cunning, ruthlessness, and political genius, she navigated the treacherous court, eliminated her rivals, and eventually became the only woman to ever rule China as emperor in her own right. Her story is a testament to the extreme measures one had to take to not just survive, but to triumph in the imperial court. She used secret police, encouraged citizens to inform on each other, and was merciless with anyone who stood in her way. Her rise illustrates the brutal nature of Temp's politics. Even the succession was a source of constant instability. When an emperor grew old or weak, the fight among his sons to become the next heir would intensify. Princes would form their own factions within the court, backed by different groups of officials, generals, and units. This often led to bloody coups and purges. The Juanwu Gate incident early in the dynasty is a classic example. Li Shimin, who would become the great Emperor Taizong, ambushed and killed his two brothers, the crown prince, and another rival prince to secure his path to the throne. This act of fratricide demonstrates the lengths to which people would go for ultimate power. This constant internal strife had devastating consequences for the empire. While officials were busy plotting against each other, important matters of state were often neglected. Corruption became widespread as factions placed their loyal but incompetent allies in key positions. The military, once the pride of the Temps, was also drawn into these political games. Regional military governors, known as jidushi, were granted enormous power to defend the frontiers. Over time, they built up their own personal armies and became warlords in all but name, paying only lip service to the emperor in China. The Untold rebellion is the ultimate example of how this internal decay led to external disaster. An Alushan was a powerful jidushi of Nanhan Chinese origin who had gained the immense favor of Emperor Juanzong and his favorite consort, Yang Gufei. He built up a massive, loyal army in the northeast. Seeing the weakness and division at the heart of the court, he rebelled. His army swept through the north, capturing the eastern capital Luoyang, and even the main capital Chang'an. The emperor was forced to flee in disgrace. The rebellion, though eventually suppressed, shattered the Temps dynasty. It led to millions of deaths, devastated the economy, and fatally weakened the central government's authority. The golden age was over, brought down not by an external enemy, but by the rot within its own glittering core. So, while we admire the beautiful poetry of Li Bai, the magnificent ceramics, and the cosmopolitan spirit of the Tempsi dynasty, it's crucial to remember the other side of the coin. The story of the Temps court is a powerful reminder that outward appearances can be deceiving. Behind the facade of unparalleled splendor lay a world of constant fear, deadly ambition, and silent, vicious conflict. It was a golden cage, where the price of proximity to power was often one's own life and integrity. The very systems of power designed to protect the emperor and the state became the source of its eventual downfall. Thank you for watching. If you found this glimpse into the hidden world of the Temps court fascinating, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next journey into the secrets of history.